pleasure to be with you right here on the India Development Debate on ET Now. I'm Supriya Srinath, and joining me in Mumbai is my colleague Sandeep Gurumurthy. Let's take you straight across to the big debate tonight then. The 8 lakh crore rupee NPA mess is much bigger scam, quote unquote, that unfolded under the UPA government than 2G or the Commonwealth Games, or for that matter, even the Coal Gate. That's the word coming in from none other than Prime Minister Narendra Modi, who believes that industry associations did not do enough to stem the rot either. Addressing the annual general meeting of leading industry lobby group FICCI, the Prime Minister also blamed industry for its reluctance to embrace GST after pitching for the unified tax regime for a very, very long time. Modi's other grouse is the reluctance of industry bodies to reach out to smaller and medium enterprises in the hour of crisis that led to the big GST switch.
On job creation, the Prime Minister says that the new wave of entrepreneurship will create many new openings which could work as an antidote for jobless growth. At the India Development Debate on ET Now, we raised some key questions. Are Modi's claims on the NPA scam valid? Why should industry be held responsible for reckless lending by banks? After spending more than 3 years in office, can the Prime Minister continue to point the finger at the previous Congress government for all the ills of the economy? Above all, is entrepreneurship the right substitute for the lack of jobs in the economy? To discuss all of that and more, we've got a stellar panel tonight on the India Development Debate. Joining us on the show this evening, we've got Ms. Naina Lal Kidwai, chairperson of Max Financial Services. She's also been a former president of FICCI and was part of that meeting with the Prime Minister today. Also, we're joined by R. Jagannathan, the editorial director of Swaraj magazine. Sadanand Dume, columnist, joins us as well live from Washington. And we've got Seshadri Chari, member of the Executive Council from the BJP, and Sanjay Jha of the Congress. Before I take it to my panelists, I'd first want to play out a small clip of what the Prime Minister specifically had to say on the NPA issue and why he referred to it as the biggest scam of the UPA government.
NPA का जो हल्ला मच रहा है, वो पहले की सरकार में बैठे अर्थशास्त्रियों की इस सरकार को दी गई सबसे बड़ी लायबिलिटी है। ये यूपीए सरकार का सबसे बड़ा घोटाला था। कॉमनवेल्थ, 2G, कोयला, इन सभी से कहीं जड़ा बड़ा घोटाला ये बैंक के कारोबार से जुड़ा हुआ था।
Okay, let me open it with Jaggi. Then Jaggi, 2G, Colgate, CWG, these were sort of massive scams that caught the imagination of the people of this country. And now the Prime Minister has indicated that he believes that the NPA issue, and he's not called it an NPA mess as all of us do, he's called it a scam, and he believes it's bigger than any of those issues that were brought up by the media. Is it fair to brush the entire bad loan mess as a scam?
See, large parts of the NPA loan accumulation certainly was the result of a scam, because we know that political pressure was applied all throughout the UPA government to lend to various unviable projects, and India Inc. was complicit in it because they wanted to put in very little equity of their own. They over leveraged. They expected banks to give them a very large portion of the project finance, and not only that, they also bring in their contribution. These things came through clandestine routes. So obviously, it is certainly, every single loan, bad loan is not a scam, but certainly a large chunk of it would be a scam, because banks were coerced to lend, and that it's very difficult to prove that, because I think we know that, but no sensible banker would have gone on crores and crores and crores to steel companies when after 2008 the whole steel business was in a mess globally. So I think it's obvious. See, for example, the loan to one single steel company like Bhushan Steel is bigger than our entire education budget. It's ridiculous. That's the kind of risks that banks took, and that could not have happened without a lot of political complicity. So one part of it is a scam. However, Mr. Modi should also accept the other reality that 3.5 years is a long time to have grips with this problem and started solving it. They came to it a bit late. They solved the coal problem with an auction, the spectrum problem with an auction, why is it that the bank has had to wait for so long for a solution, and it will probably go on for another 12 months as the NCLT process continues. But he is right, a substantial part of it is a scam.
All right. Actually, even Jaggi agrees a substantial part of it is a scam, even though he wants to distinguish between what happened with banks and how they haven't come out of the mess vis-a-vis telecom and coal that seems to have left the rot behind. Sadanand, I'm going to come to you. The larger point that Jaggi makes about political complicity, and you know, this mess couldn't have gone to the monumental size that it has if it wasn't political complicity, if it wasn't crony capitalism involved in there, and which is perhaps why he's tempted to agree with the Prime Minister to call it a scam. Will you perhaps also call it a scam, or do you believe that there is some amount of fraud and some amount of failure that has resulted into all of this?
I think calling the whole thing a scam or sort of painting it with as broad a brush as the Prime Minister used is unhelpful. It's certainly true that there's a lot of rot in the banking system, and it's certainly true that the connection is between state-owned banks and their political masters. My problem really is that, as with many other things, the Prime Minister is sort of correct in his diagnosis, but he isn't very deep in his diagnosis. But the problem really here, at the root of this problem, is Indira Gandhi's nationalization of the banks. Why are 70% of India's banking assets state-owned? And the idea that there is this systemic problem and something has to be done in systemic terms to fix it, that I feel is still lacking in this government. Though it's certainly true, and I don't think anybody will defend the record of the UPA in terms of how the state-owned banks performed during those 10 years.
Let's get a view from industry. Ms. Naina Lal Kidwai, an ace banker herself and a former president of FICCI. You were there when the Prime Minister made this speech, and it was interesting to see that, you know, while he did have some harsh words for industry at large, the overall mood was pretty cheerful, and we saw a lot of industry leaders applaud the Prime Minister for some of these remarks. Help us understand, how did the industry receive the Prime Minister's statement specifically on the issue of NPA?
So on NPAs, clearly a very big issue. The Prime Minister put it right up there. It wasn't one of the things that got applauded, but if you were to ask, he also mentioned some of the measures being taken and the desire and need to clean it up. And I think if that has to be the focus, there is regulation that is in place today. The bankruptcy code, the whole tribunals, setting up of the national tribunals, which is now well on track. And these are measures which will help to sort things out. I think it's hard to paint every aspect of bad loans with the same brush. There was a global, headwind. Sectors across the world like steel did suffer, and India likewise. Did we create our own problems in some sectors, particularly with the coal supply to power and to some extent to the steel sector? We did, because in our interest of acting, because we thought it was a scam, and it's not for me to go into whether it was or wasn't, but the effect that we took in terms of actually stopping the supply as happened really also created its own problem. And the issue really is that at the end of the day, when there is, I would call it regulatory failure, where regulations are such that there are agreements that are entered into by government or quasi-government bodies or public sector companies with industry, and those agreements fall apart. There was a lot of industry there that should have received coal at a price, which it didn't, ended up having to import it. Countries, seeing that India suddenly turned to imports, countries like Indonesia jacked up their prices, threefold, and industry here in India had to suffer. So the whole cycle in each industry has been different. So it's unfair, I think, to put everything on the ground of collusion or political interference. Could banks have been more cautious? Yes. Should companies have been as leveraged as they were? It's very easy in hindsight to say no. But could we have, at the end of the day, been in a better position than we are today, than we were, in fact, otherwise? I would say some of the knee-jerk reactions that happened, particularly on the issues of coal supply and regulation changes, as we see to some extent even in telecom, are issues which we could have done well not to have. And yes, the remark made in terms of the public sector and why do we need 75% of the banking sector with in the hands of government, I think that is certainly something we should be changing.
Indeed, and I think there has to be public pressure and a public discourse for that to change, because government alone is not going to move the needle on that one. But Sanjay Jha, I'm going to come to you. And while the Prime Minister perhaps did call NPAs a scam, and our panel here is divided on whether he was justified in painting everything with the same brush, or is there more discretionary and more more granular approach to that. But the reality is that this government inherited the mess that was created in yours. And I'm not talking rhetoric. I'm not talking about the Prime Minister and his colleagues here. I'm throwing numbers at you. In 2009, the total NPA was at 64,000 crore rupees. By the end of your tenure in 2014, that NPA mess had climbed to 4.5 lakh crore rupees. This was not just reckless lending. This also does signify some amount of political collusion. There was political, there was complicity.
Let me be very blunt here right now. I think the Prime Minister, Mr. Modi, is being terribly briefed, or he's being deliberately disingenuous. It started with his preposterous allegations against Dr. Manmohan Singh of being an anti-national and conspiring an anti-BJP plan in Gujarat, which has earned him some terrible, I think, and very justifiable terrible reviews. But his statement on the NPS today, I thought, was a complete shocker. Why don't while I give the answer, why don't you just put your team to kindly put out the Indian Express article, where the Indian Express, a leading newspaper of India, did an RTI query. And that RTI query puts up some astonishing numbers. And the numbers are that this year itself, Mr. Modi's government has written off 55,000 crores in terms of, NPAs. That is the public sector banks. And if you add up the last 3 years, it's an astronomical 1,60,000 crores. I think the fundamental question, Supriya, that we need to talk about, we are talking economics, a bank's balance sheet. Rhetorics don't work here at all. Mr. Modi is in his 4th year. Mr. Jaitley will be presenting his last budget. I mean, this government cannot make such a farcical, kind of statements on the Indian economy or the banks by saying this is a legacy issue after 4 years. Well, you are voted out, voted in for this. And frankly, if you don't have an answers, quit, or you will be defeated in 2019. What is the truth? The truth is that today Mr. Modi is not willing to publicly disclose, and this government has an onus to do that to all the public in India. Who are the largest 10 willful defaulters? Can India know today who are the 10 biggest corporates who have been the borrowers from banks that have not paid? I mean, this is the question where the government is itself protecting those big borrowers that Mr. Modi talks about. I think the larger point, I don't agree with anybody who says that all the NPAs are a scam. I think Mr. Modi should be reminded that when the UPA came into power in 2004, there were newspapers running headlines, the pink papers, called the Great Bank Robbery that happened during Vajpayee's time as Prime Minister. So there is an inheritance of bank bad loans over a considerable period of time.
Fair enough.
Some of them get aggravated. But to call it as a UPA scam, I think it is an NPA scam.
Okay, your point is well taken,
government.
Sanjay Jha, your point is well taken, but no one in the panel is going to accept the fact that that these NPAs were not a creation of the UPA government. It was a clear creation of the policy paralysis that happened in the UPA government. But you're right to say that why we're talking about it 3.5 years into the tenure of this government, a point that Jaggi made as well. And so I'm taking that question to Seshadri Chari, representing the BJP. The big question then is that, sir, 3.5 years into the tenure of this government, why are we still blaming the Congress and the UPA for all the problems plaguing the economy? Isn't 3.5 years enough of a time for the government to have fixed the NPA mess? The concrete steps that have been taken have only been taken over the last 6 months, like Jaggi pointed out, whether it's bank recapitalization, whether it is the IBC ordinance. Much of it has happened over the last 6 months. Why did it take 3.5 years for the government to address what was, without any doubt, the biggest problem it needed to fix?
When we talk of bank NPAs going from 60 lakh crores to more than 450 lakh crores, you remember one thing,
after 90 days, if a loan is not repaid, it slips into a non-performing asset. So you take the case of the then Prime Minister Dr. Manmohan Singh address to FICCI in 2005, where he speaks about performance of banks, and span it to 2013. For these almost 10 years, the UPA government does nothing and leaves a huge NPA, whether it is because of the non-performing method of the banks, or whether it is the lack of prudence on the part of banks while giving loans. Whatever may be the reason, whether there is a political interference or not, because we have seen right from the time the banks were nationalized by Mrs. Indira Gandhi, we have seen about the Nagarwala case and so many other cases where political bosses have directly interfered in the functioning of the banking system, including the loan mela. I mean, giving of loans was organized as a function, as a mela, and people were told that these banks are yours, you have repayment. Even then, smaller loan holders, smaller borrowers have had the courtesy to repay, rather than the bigger ones who have actually swindled these banks. So it is necessarily looking at it, a big chunk of the NPA falls under the category of scam or absolutely happening with the total knowledge and connivance of the political establishment. That is the point that the Prime Minister is trying to make.
Is exactly what a
Now,
definition of a scam will
if
be.
it happens that the immediate predecessor of this government, if the immediate predecessor is the UPA, then they are responsible for it and they should accept the responsibility. Rather, I would come out and suggest that 3.5 years is not very large amount, long period for a government to take action, and looking at the quantum of NPA
during your time,
and looking at the number of banks
your
involved.
Who are you protecting?
Looking
okay,
at
Mr.
the
Chari,
number
I
of
get your
banks
point there.
involved.
I get your point there. What you're saying is they've been in office for 10 long. Mr. Chari, I get your point there. What you're essentially referring to is that they've been in office for 10 long years. They have to take some part of the blame, and in 3.5 years, the government cannot be expected to clean up the entire mess. I take your point on note, but I'm going to take it across to Sadanand Dume. And Sadanand, I just want to remove the debate away from UPA versus NDA to Raghuram Rajan, and it is for everybody to see. They can all go back. He really waged a war against the crony capitalists. He in some sense waged a war against the bad loan mess. He single-mindedly went after sorting out the NPAs. It's after him demitting office did demonetization happen, and then for the next 8-9 months the Indian economy and Indian banks were only dealing with demonetization, remonetization, demonetization, you know, getting into digital economy, digital currency and all of that. Do you believe on that account, and you know what we are seeing perhaps now, whether it's the IBC and other rules that are changing, this could have been done exactly a year back. Have we delayed the crackdown on NPA due to demonetization, and does the government of the day then shoulder the blame for defocusing banks from the NPA crackdown? That should have happened perhaps last year and not now.
No, I think the answer is in your question, Supriya. I agree with you 100%. It's certainly true that Raghuram Rajan deserves a great deal of credit, and in fact the fact that the percentage of NPAs has risen in many ways is a good thing, because at least there was a greater honesty in reporting, which was in part because Rajan was willing to crack the whip. So certainly I think the nation owes him a debt of gratitude on that. You all know my views on demonetization, which I like to call one of the stupidest things that any government of India has done in the last 25 years, if not the last 70 years. So let's not get into that. But I think the larger question is, how does the government approach things that are politically tricky? And there's no question that this is a politically tricky thing. This is a volatile subject. The way it gets translated into political discourse tends to be oversimplified and so on. And the fact is, as with many other things, as with the privatization program, for instance, the government has not been willing to bite the bullet and do things that are difficult. So it basically kicked a can down the road, and even the moves that it has made, some of which are welcome, hasn't really gone to the heart of the issue. You can't fix this problem as long as more than 70% of your banking assets are controlled by the government. There is going to be some other form of cronyism. Just one last point. Seshadri Chaudhary spoke about loan melas, and I agree with him entirely that they were a travesty. But what is mudra? Mudra to me is a dressed up loan mela. So some of these bad instincts that the political class has, whether it's UPA, whether it's NDA, whether it's Congress, whether it's BJP, is tied to the structure created by bank nationalization. And unless we start addressing that, the problem is not really going to be solved.
It's an important point you're making, and I will let Seshadri come in on that in just a bit. But a quick point to Jaggi, which is on the crackdown that's happened. And, is it also a classic case of damned if you do and damned if you don't? Look at what the government has done over the last, 6 months. A massive bank recapitalization plan, followed by, of course, amendments to the Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code, which is a big signal that they've taken against corporate India, sent to corporate India on the fact that, no more free lunches. And yet this whole rhetoric of the fact that, it's going to crack down on sort of the risk appetite in the economy, and, it'll hurt the corporate sector. So what does one do? If you take strict action like they do, you get stick because you're seen as anti-industry. If you don't, you're criticized for not acting on the biggest problem. So is it a case of damned if you do and damned if you don't?
Absolutely. I think this government has been consistent in one area. Even before the IBC law was passed, and even before several bad loans were shifted to the NCLT, if you see the track record of this government, they've been consistently closing the loopholes that allowed black money to come into the economy and be used. I mean, you close the Cyprus route, you close the Mauritius route, you close the Singapore road, you had voluntary disclosure schemes to end tax evasion. Then, of course, you got followed by demonetization. It wasn't quite a success. Obviously, it was a problem. Then you have GST. You are trying to formalize the economy and narrowing the routes for black money to keep survey. Now we have the Benomi transactions law, which again is going to constrain bad money from polluting the good money. So the point is, there has been some consistency in the way the government has been trying to formalize finance and making sure that illegal sources end. So that, in fact, is one of the reasons for the structural slowdown in the economy, because when you close avenues for easy non-tax paid money to come into formal finance, you are actually slowing down the economy, and you are going to pay the price. And that is happening there consistently. Now that you are into the NCLT and IBC resolution process, you are going to face a further slowdown, because banks have to take a haircut, and the only way you can actually save the situation is by recapitalizing them. So if the Congress makes false allegations like saying that, okay, oh, you're writing off so much loans, you tell me what is the other way you can do. When a loan has gone bad, struggle and say nothing is going to happen. I mean, you have to write off a bad loan that you have given, and there is no other solution. I mean, this is silly to say that you have written off so many loans. I mean, just look at all the loans you have written off since 1947, you will come to a horrendous figure. So bad loans that happen due to bad business decisions are one thing, but bad loans that happen due to crony socialism, which is what the UPA was practicing, is certainly half a scam.
Okay, bad loans due to bad decisions and bad business cycles is quite one thing, but bad loans due to crony socialism is perhaps another. But I'm going to get Nainalal Kidwai, because, at one level, you represent Indian industry, you had your skin in the game as a banker. The question really, ma'am, is that how do you crack down on the bad loan mess? Because if you really go hammer and tongs after the NPA, the mountain of NPA, you are told that you're going to kill the risk appetite of Indian industry. No promoter is then left to bid for assets. There may be asset value erosion that may happen. That's one side of the argument. The other side of the argument, if you don't crack down upon errant promoters, you actually let debt be treated as equity, like Indian industry has done for very, very long. So A, how do you find that balance? And B, how did the industry take to some of the very strong statements that the Prime Minister did make on the whole NPA issue there? Because he did say very categorically that they are a part of the mess that created NPAs.
So if you look at this whole situation today, the biggest problem in our country has been that we haven't had a proper workout situation. And by a workout, I mean, there will be cycles in industry, and it exists around the world, where the patient is on a table and the patient is desperately in need of oxygen. So, you know, a company that's got an issue, and you have to be able to have a system where you can step in before the patient is dead. And how do you administer that oxygen in time? And that workout situation, whether it's a Chapter 11 in the US or indeed what we are now finally putting to place, which is a whole bankruptcy code and tribunals who can act in a quick way, when lenders convening in order to do this, are all part of that exercise. Because as the interest ticker keeps adding on, it only compounds the exercise for a half-dead company. So getting these workouts straightened out are key, and that has taken time, all directionally right, but has taken time. And as these tribunals kick in and the first judgments begin to come, we will know where it lands. So we at the moment have a situation where companies have been carrying this debt forever. Rectification has not been possible because everything's frozen. Lenders, each one sequesters their part of the asset and does not allow the company to function. And what we need really is exactly what happened in the Satyam situation, if you will recall, in a healthy company on the face of it, at the sort of issue of a fraud, but enabled a bunch of people to come together, and those people appointed by a government who stepped in, ensured that income tax did not close accounts so that the company's flow of money remained, that customers who were nervous around the company were given assurance that the company would find a new home, as it did in Mahindra's. And all of this happened in a very short period of time. So acting swiftly can indeed solve situations which we in our country have never had the ability to do, because we pull in different directions. So that will be the change which we need, and which is a very important development going forward. However, we do have this history and legacy now, which is not going to be easy to resolve. And I think there has to be constructive engagement and solutions, because we don't want to kill these companies, we don't want to kill industry, we don't want to kill the jobs around it. We want to restore as many of these companies to health as we can. In some cases it will change hands, in other cases it may need more funding. Okay. And in a third lot of cases, yes, they may have to shut down, and this whole willful defaulter situation be one which is classified, but not every defaulter is a willful defaulter.
Fair enough. You know, we've got a lot of ground to cover, and I want to quickly shift focus and talk about what the Prime Minister said on GST, and in a sense blaming the industry for not playing its part in embracing the goods and service tax. But let's first hear his comments on GST, and I'm going to take it to the politicians on the panel for their reactions to those comments. The Prime Minister on GST first.
साल में 4 डेलीगेशन फिक्की और सीआईआई के आते थे जीएसटी के लिए। अब जब जीएसटी लागू हो चुका है तो उसे और प्रभावी बनाने के लिए आपकी संस्था क्या भूमिका निभा रही है? सरकार अपनी तरफ से कोशिश कर रही है, लेकिन क्या फिक्की की तरफ से लोगों में, व्यापारियों में किसी तरह की जागरूकता लाने में कोई कंट्रीब्यूशन हो सकता है क्या?
Okay, Seshadri Chari, comment on that. You know, when I heard those comments, it almost seemed like as if the Prime Minister and the government is blaming the industry for sort of not smooth rollout of goods and services tax. Is that fair criticism?
No, I don't. I mean, if you heard it in Hindi, he never blamed the industry. He said, जागरूकता ला सकती है क्या? He is only asking the industry to chip in and do its own, play its own part of the role. It's the government has to introduce, government has introduced GST. Now it's not for the government alone to educate the industry, educate the customers and educate the traders, educate the stakeholders. It is also the part of the industry to do it, and FICCI, a 90-year-old organization, has very big industries as part of its membership, and what FICCI says will go down well among the people more than probably what the government alone says. So he is only requesting the industry to do its part, play its role in educating the people on GST, which is what he is saying. So he has not blamed the industry as such. If you hear the Hindi speech properly, he very clearly says, क्या आप लोग इस पे कुछ कर सकते हैं क्या? Can you people do something in this role of educating the people? That is what he has said. I don't think this amounts to blaming. Sorry.
Okay. Shashadri Chari believes he's not blaming the industry, but Sanjay Jha, I know I must ask you this question. Is the reference perhaps more to traders than industry? I mean, look at how they've evaded the tax net. They have single-handedly not embraced, they have boycotted the reform. I'm just going to quote numbers to you, and I think they tell a story, because if you actually see the numbers that have come, in the month of November, for instance, the returns filed were just 4.4 million, and this is much lower than the registrations or the migrations that have happened. So in some sense, is he really speaking to the trader community using that platform, but really talking to the traders who have for long evaded taxation, who should be in the tax net and who are now not embracing the GST? Is he really targeting them?
Supriya, let me tell you, I think Mr. Modi's government doesn't understand the G of governance. When you're implementing such a historic indirect tax reform, which is complex even for people who are seasoned people in industry and business, I mean, you have to first learn how to walk before you run. But this is a government which is always into this midnight drama, headline hunting, event management. So they went ahead and implemented it in July 1. Simple question. 60% of the small traders in this country are not necessarily computer literate. Many of them, by the way, are now in the tax net. Earlier, they were not in the VAT, excise duty, shall we say, dragnet. Now, this is an absolutely nonsensical implementation. The fact that India's GST has actually caused the GDP to become sluggish, or the fact that the working capital of the small traders has gone down. And by the way, let me tell you, many of the large companies are not dealing with many of the small suppliers because they are unregistered dealers. So what has happened is that you have aggravated the crisis, and while the large companies will be able to smother over a period of time the downsides of a terribly hasty GST implementation, there's a large section of India that is getting wiped out. So I think that is the reality, and it's absolutely astonishing that the Prime Minister seems to blame other people. You see, when the GST execution began to fail, he suddenly went and said, I'm not the only party that should be blamed because the other parties also supported it. So here is a Prime Minister who will never take responsibility. He never takes accountability for his errors. He always shirks it and blames other people. This is trademark Narendra Modi style of leadership that we have seen over the last 4 years. The truth is that today, if the Indian economy is hurting, it's on account of not just the terrible decision to do demonetization, the hasty execution of GST, but the fact that over the last 4 years, they have always remained in this mode, Supriya, that you can blame the past for the failures, and we will talk about creating revolutions when actually nothing is happening on the ground. By the way, even on the bank recapitalization,
I'm afraid I have to interrupt you.
At the time of 2020 or what?
Actually, let's go across and listen into the Prime Minister as he spoke about MSMEs. He virtually used the big business platform to deliver his message, it seems, to the small industry. Let's listen into the Prime Minister before we go any further.
FICCI की आयु हो गई 90 साल। MSME वर्टिकल का गठन 2013 में किया गया था, 2013 में, जब हमारे छोटे उद्योगों की हैंड होल्डिंग करेगी तो वो भी और ज्यादा ऊर्जा के साथ काम कर पाएंगे और सफल होंगे।
All right, I'm going to take it across to Sadanand Dhume. Sadanand, the Prime Minister did urge the industry to handhold MSMEs, and he's using the platform like FICCI to do so. But truth be told, these MSMEs have perhaps been the worst hit due to demonetization and GST. Is it then fair for the Prime Minister to ask big industry to do this job?
I just thought it just struck me as a little bit odd. I mean, so what was he getting at? And why should a politician be telling a private industry body who they should be reaching out to and who they should be doing what for? It's the government's job to put in place policies, and it's the government's job to certainly help the MSME. My larger issue with this speech, if you just step back for a minute, is that it's very clearly a campaign speech, right? We are fully in 2019 mode as far as I can see. And you can see the notable difference in the tone of the Prime Minister is using now compared to, say, the tone he was using in 2013 and 2014 when he was a candidate. Now, in the past, his approach towards business when he was sort of rising to power was much more collaborative. And there was a sense of optimism and hope in his speeches. Now it's not as collaborative, it's much more instructive. And that sense of hope and optimism has been replaced by a sense of foreboding. And to me, at least, this is sort of not a very positive development.
Pick on that point, is he also changing the, you're trying to signal, in the build up to 2019 to the right constituency, Jaggi, using a platform like FICCI where essentially it's big business, big industry, but essentially the speech, large part of it was directed at MSMEs. His comments on MSMEs were also saying that aapka paisa, MSMEs ka paisa, bade udyogpatiyon ke paas atka hua hota hai. So, release that money. So, using that platform to send a signal to MSMEs who've been hit, but who are an important constituency. So is that a sort of transition as well that he's trying to make in the build up to 2019, Jaggi?
Yes, see, one consistent theme in all that Mr. Modi has done is he's trying to formalize the economy in more ways than one. So even the question of jobs, as long as you're going to have suboptimal enterprises that can survive only if they do not pay tax or if they do not give PF contributions, or if they do not think, if they can survive only by being an illegal enterprise. India has 63 or 65 million enterprises. Most of them are nonsensical enterprises. The USA gets by with 22 million companies. Here you have 68 million thing with 1/6 the size of the US economy. Many of these guys have to become just job holders, and they have to become less of self-employed and small enterprises. And in that sense, I think till you reduce the number of MSMEs and make them grow bigger, micro has to become S, S has to become medium, medium has to become large. Here micro remains micro, small remains the thing. I think the emphasis on formalizing this, without that you're not going to get better jobs. You're going to get low quality jobs where the guy is not going to pay minimum wages or he's not going to pay some contributions. I think we need to reduce the number of MSMEs, and of course telling large industry that you must pay their bills is one part of it, but largely you need to rationalize the number of MSMEs you have in this country by making them more formal enterprises. Only then wages and jobs will grow. Otherwise you will have suboptimal jobs. It's not going, you're not going to grow jobs with this kind of MSME sector. So I think the formalization of the economy, in which whether it's demonetization or GST, they're all having a role. They are improving and pushing everybody towards formalization. You will get easier credit, you will get cheaper credit, you will get one thing. If you formalize, you start paying your tax, make sure that you give good thing to labor. That is the direction we need to go. So you're going to have a short-term blip because you're pushing people towards the right legal route. At some point, this will pay off. And I think it's the right thing. Unfortunately, it may not help him politically, but whoever comes in 2019 is going to benefit hugely from this shift.
I wonder if Mr. Modi will be happy in hearing that this may not benefit him politically and he's paving the ground for anybody else to come and reap the benefits. But Sanjay Jha, I'm going to quickly take this point across. The point that, Jaggi made about optimization of jobs, about formalization of the economy, about rationalization of MSMEs. If I may talk about the larger point that the Prime Minister also did try and make, was he told the industry, you get your house in order, and look at the messaging that he's doing. He seems to be a man who wants to address black money. He seems to be a man who wants to clean up the economy. When he went to that seminar of CAs, he told them to stop doing what they were doing, to stop helping people evade the system, to radically reform. Today he tells Indian industry, get your own house in order. I'm presuming he does make the industry a little nervous, but he seems to be someone who wants to clean up.
Supriya, I think let's bite the bullet on this one. In political rhetoric at the campaigns, we very often refer to the BJP as TV par hero, Zameen par zero. Let me take the black money as a perfect example to demonstrate it to you and your viewers how Mr. Modi is once again indulging in his typical cosmetic lip service, and Mr. Rahul Gandhi is bang on target when he says his credibility is at an all-time low. Let's take black money. What has happened on the Panama Papers and the Paradise Papers? In neighboring Pakistan, that every day on certain TV channels they are called as a failed state, a banana republic, a sitting Prime Minister was asked to go. Investigations are on in Pakistan. In India, it's a completely reverse story. Every time we ask the government what they're doing, they're saying there's some summons have been sent, some investigation is going on. Demonetization, how much black money came out, who's been arrested, who's been jailed, nobody knows. So the truth is, this is a government that hasn't got the Lokpal appointed after 4 years, has diluted the RTI. And by the way, since we talk of black money, they have come out with a law announced by the finance minister with a lot of fanfare, where a corporate can donate money to a political party and remain anonymous. That is virtually saying, I legitimize black money and corruption. So I think the political hypocrisy, let's put it aside. The truth is that Mr. Modi is struggling, and I could make out in his speech today, he's struggling to make a case that this government has at all performed. I'll give you 4 parameters, and we debate it on your channel very often. Jobs, private investment, you take it in the form of gross fixed capital formation.
Right.
We look at consumption spending, look at exports.
Okay.
These 4 broadly define the health of an economy.
Okay.
And you will know that
Sanjay,
India is at the moment static or going negative.
Okay.
And Mr. Modi has no answers.
Okay. Seshadri Chari, I'm going to give you 30 seconds to counter Sanjay Jha on his claims on black money. I'm sure you'll have a point to make, especially on Panama Papers and Paradise Papers, where investigation is happening, notices have been sent, summons have been issued. But more importantly, I want to add one question on the point that he made on jobs, because that's something that the Prime Minister spoke about as well. And we almost feel like this narrative is getting built up, that, in today's economy, in this sort of modern economy, job creation cannot happen at the same clip at which it happened a decade ago. And this whole move towards entrepreneurship, this whole move towards from a nation of job seekers to being a job creators. But is that a substitute? Is entrepreneurship going to be a substitute for job creating, thrust of an economy? Is that the way to go about the problem of job creation? Seshadri Chari.
As far as asking the Prime Minister to go because of corruption and black money, people of India have done it in 2014. So I don't have to answer Sanjay Jha on all these things. So I rest my case as far as corruption and other things, asking the Prime Minister to go home is concerned. So let's set the better as far as the Congress corruption is concerned. What you created in 20 years, what you created in 60 years, you expect the Prime Minister Modi to clean it up in 3 years. It is impossible. So we'll have to tackle this issue for a longer time. So having said this, I think the Prime Minister is addressing a larger constituency as far as MSME is concerned, as far as firming up the economy is concerned. This is not a one-time job, it's not an overnight job, and creation of jobs is one part of it. And the most important element is he is trying to tell the people, industry also, bigger industries also, and the point that he has made as far as MSME is concerned is also very valid. Those who are involved in MSME sector would know how large industries are virtually fleecing them, and these Babu Dome, or what we call the corruption at the lower level, it is the MSMEs which are suffering maximum because of this. It is the NPAs are not because of MSMEs, the NPAs are because of larger industries and private sector banks. In 2018, first 3 large NPAs were private sector banks. So having said all these things, I think we are getting into a very different economic narrative. It's not just the creation of jobs, it's also creating opportunities for the people. Whether you want to take it as a job opportunity or you want to be an entrepreneur, I think it's a very large picture that this country is trying to understand and enter into.
Give us solutions.
Congress is too small a party to really see this large picture.
Okay, fair point indeed.
Really,
Congress is not seeing the large picture.
That is the height of
political
arrogance.
To the last end of my. Okay. All right, I'm really going to move to the last leg of this debate, and Jaggi, I'm going to come to you. The Prime Minister very categorically said, and tongue-in-cheek, he did say that when a batsman begins to bat at 94, he starts playing slowly, but the idea is to hit a 6 and a 4 and get to your century. He's telling the Indian industry to not be nervous batsmen, but hit those boundaries, hit those big sixes. Is he really telling the Indian industry to begin doing the heavy lifting?
Yeah, I would think so. The problem with Indian industry is that it has had very little skin in the game, even though it has been a large bank borrower for all these years. A lot of their own contributions also came from bank borrowings, which then came back as a thing. I think that is the reason why you have such a big NPA problem, because the business had very little skin in the game. Most of the money came from banks, most of the NPAs are also going back to banks. So in a sense, it is the government that has supported this business. I think the Prime Minister is saying that, look, you've got to now have skin in the game, you've got to get things done, you've got to make sure that the small sector is paid properly, you've got to clean up your mess, you've got to do things that are right and not just done what they were there in the past. So I think it would have been easier for, let's say, a corrupt government to fix this problem in 2 years by just using taxpayer money to do everything. But I think he has said now you've got to legitimize yourself and you got to do the right things for the economy. And I think while big industry might take it with a pinch of salt, but the message is the right one to give. You have a lot of bogus enterprises, you have too many illegal enterprises, and this is what flourished in crony socialism, and I think it's time to end it. And I think we keep valorizing this informal sector. It's largely an illegal sector, or as people who are taking up enterprise because they have no jobs. I think you need to shrink that and you need to work on that. I think you need genuine industry, you need industry that can grow, and that you're at the cusp of that change. That's why we are seeing slowdown in growth. All these things are going to change. They need to change, and the message PM given is the right one.
Okay. Sadanand, I'm going to give you just 30 seconds. You know, some would argue that when you need to get closer to a century, you don't expect Ravichandran Ashwin to hit the 4 and the 6s. The Virat Kohli who should be hitting the boundaries and the 6s, in which case it's the government and the Prime Minister that needs to do that, come up with that big shot.
No, absolutely. And I mean, let's be very clear. If MSMEs are suffering, it's because of first of all, the disastrous policy of demonetization and the double whammy, which was the GST being overly complex and poorly designed. This is what the government has been doing. It's not because of big businesses that small businesses are suffering. And I think we should be very explicit about that and leave that on the table. I also disagree with, Jaggi's idea that, there's some kind of, that there's something wrong with India's small businesses because they're informal or because they employ relatively few people. It's just something organic. It's linked to the economy. And if you want to change that over time, you change that over time by creating incentives for small businesses to become bigger. You create that by sort of creating a more friendly, market-oriented economy. You don't have this sort of strange notion that some businesses must be culled and there has to be this artificial outside government force that's going out and destroying these businesses, because what you are doing in the end is destroying livelihoods. And so the notion that we should even be entertaining this, right? If you sort of put this compare this with China, where Deng Xiaoping said, it doesn't matter whether a cat is black or white as long as it catches mice. And we seem to be in India having this other conversation, which is that, what we really need is a whole bunch of white cats. And I have to say, I completely disagree with that.
Right. All right. On that note of disagreement, it's always fascinating to have all of you right here on the India development debate. This has been another very, very enlightening discussion as far as the Prime Minister's speech is concerned. But yes, the government can't handle small industry to big. An enabling environment needs to be created for both big and small to thrive. And the onus on that lies squarely on the government. But on that note, completely out of time on this edition of the India development debate. Thank you very, very much for being with us.
Many thanks to all our panelists as well, Sadanand Dume, R. Jagannathan, Seshadri and Sanjay Jha for joining us on this edition of the India Development Debate. Up next is Top 10 at 10 with Tanya. Keep it with ET Now.